Hey everyone, good day to all of you. I hope you're all doing well. So I've been doing a G36 build recently. If you saw my previous SL8 video, that's what this has turned into. Still in progress, as you can tell. You need to do a lot of stuff with the barrel, but by and large it is nearing completion. I've been deliberating a ton over the sight rail, and that is something I wanted to talk about today because I noticed that this B&T sight rail has pretty much no reviews on it whatsoever. I was really searching for information for weeks myself before I picked it up and finally just pulled the trigger on it and kind of hope for the best. But I'm hoping that with this video that'll hopefully clear up a lot of that just drought of information that's out there, and hopefully no one else will have to go through just kind of guessing and hoping for the best when you're picking up one of these. So let's get started with the most basic stuff, just the dimensions of the rail itself. So this sits about 0.2 inches lower than an SL8 rail. So that's not the lowest sight rail out there. For example, comparing it to a lot of the other G36 sight rails out there, the actual HK ones, those are quite a bit lower. So this one's kind of in between the SL8 rail, which is I think the tallest on the market that I'm aware of. The main advantage of this rail, really, I would say, and the primary reason I picked it up is because of this gooseneck extended rail up here on the front. You can see I have my laser aiming module mounted to it, mostly just because I was testing it. I'm not really using this a whole lot for night vision yet because I want to put a flash hider on it at minimum. Yeah, this laser is actually mounted to the rail. It's not mounted to the handguard, despite how it might look, because it does kind of wrap around there. But if you actually look from this side, you can see it's just kind of floating up there. Moving back to just this sight rail itself first, one other thing I did want to point out on the dimensions, especially when talking about this gooseneck rail up front, this is sized for a G36K handguard. So what I have on here right now is one of the full-length handguards you can see with the 6 slots. I did actually do a dry run with night vision just to kind of see how well it does here, and I was actually impressed. I'm not getting hardly any occlusion even with the CQB diffuser on my IR illuminator here. Of course I am getting some on the barrel, but I can't really help that when it's sticking out that much. But surprisingly, the handguard itself was really not causing an issue even in this current configuration. It was really, really nice. So I had no complaints with that. I'm going to be switching the exact laser I will be using, but regardless, I don't think you're going to have an issue. This DERV that I'm using right here is one of the lower ones on the market, and if that one doesn't have an issue, then probably the vast majority of the other lasers out there aren't going to have any problem with occlusion with this setup either. I'm going to move back now. I want to talk about the sights on here itself. So this specific rail does come with fixed iron sights. B&T does also make a version with folding iron sights, which I'm going to get to in a little bit because there's also some other weird discrepancies in the overall design, more than just the sights between the two rails. So on this version, what you have is your front sight. You can see right there, I did paint it red just for a little bit easier acquisition. Normally it would just be black. But first weird thing about this might look like a AK front sight post, but it's actually not. This is its own proprietary front sight post. You can't use an A2, you can't use an AK front sight post, and similarly you cannot use any of the tools from those either. So that was my first complaint with this, is I'm not aware of any proper tooling to adjust the front and rear sight on here. I just ended up using pliers, which ended up working not too badly. You do need to be careful when you're using pliers, not mar everything up, but it's not terrible. I used a lockjaw plier in the rear for this rear sight adjustment, and just my multi-tool for the front sight, just because the lockjaw would not fit in there. But the wider jaw pliers that you can get, the less likely you are to actually mar anything. So that's what I would recommend. When you are zeroing your iron sights, all of your elevation adjustment is going to be done on your front sight, and all your windage is going to be done on the rear sight. So how that works for your elevation, you're just going to turn this clockwise to raise the point of impact. What I was doing was just kind of estimating in degrees. So what I found was doing about a 90-degree turn would usually give me about 1.5 to 2 MOA, very approximate, on your rear sight for your windage when you're adjusting that. This one right here, this actually does have clicks. However, I wasn't really using the clicks when I was zeroing it, just because I found it easier to remember, you know, oh, I need to move it 90 degrees up and I need to move it 90 degrees to the right, for instance. So if you do use the clicks though, and you want to move this 90 degrees, it's going to be about 3 or 4 clicks. And usually I was getting about the same amount of movement, so 1.5 to 2 MOA-ish on that. This is about a 12-inch sight radius, you can see right there. Pretty normal for the G36 platform, so it shouldn't be too terribly different regardless of the barrel length, but just keep in mind, it is a little bit coarse. You do have a bit more granularity on the rear sight, but not the biggest amount. It's more so a backup iron sight. On the rear sight, you do actually have, just like on an M16, you have two diopters. Your smaller diopter is marked for 400, and then you can flip this to the bigger diopter, which is marked for 250. Now, I wanted to go back. If you remember just a little bit ago, I was saying that there are two kind of major versions of this rail, and technically there's a few more because they do have a version without the gooseneck rail up here. But by and large, the biggest differences are that you have the fixed version, like this one, or a folding sight version. Now, for the other peculiarities with this, first off, if you do choose the fixed sight version, you actually have a little bit more rail space. I'll put up a diagram. So at the very rear of the folding sight version, you have a lot of cutaway slots that you could probably get away with mounting like a magnifier onto, but I wouldn't necessarily trust it with anything that really needs to hold zero. On the other hand, if you go with the fixed sight version, keep in mind you do need to clear the rear sight for your for the bell of your optic. This measures about 0.7 inches above the rail right here, you can see. So just take that into consideration if you're opting to go with this rail. Now, the other very weird difference between the folding and fixed sight versions of these rails is the fixed version actually has this huge drop down here. You can see it's really overbuilt, has a lot more reinforcement than I would say is really necessary. If you look at this compared to the folding sight version, this whole drop down by the charging handle, it's cut away. I was actually really worried about this drop making the charging handle completely inaccessible in the rearward position. From my practice thus far, it hasn't really, surprisingly to me, hasn't really been as big of an issue as I thought it would be. If you have really big hands and you're wearing really thick winter gloves, it could still be an issue, but for the vast majority of stuff, you're probably going to be fine. And like I said, for everything I've been doing, it's been not an issue. But you do need to change your technique a little bit. So for me, what I usually like to do when I'm up here, I usually like to reach over it, you can see. But if your charging handle's locked to the rear with this rail, with how little space you have, I usually actually need to go more so to the front of it, kind of leading with my index finger to be able to actuate the charging handle there. So again, it's not impossible. I still would prefer that they just didn't have this reinforcing little drop there. It does also add a lot of weight to it. It's nothing too crazy and uncontrollable, but you actually definitely do feel the difference going from the SL8, in my case, the SL8 sight rail up here, to this one. I can actually feel it's more top heavy now, even with everything else being the same. Even if I were to remove the laser, just same optic setup, yeah, you can feel the difference there. There is overall a lot less material on the folding sight version, so if you're really worried about this drop causing you issues, or you just don't want it to be as heavy, probably go with the folding sight version. There's also just less material on the folding version up front where it cantilevers forward into this gooseneck rail. Another reason I actually went with the fixed sight version of this rail, because those sights on that version are really a lot more just for emergencies, I should say, because you just have a blade on the front sight, and I really dislike that as far as actual usability. I always like having some ears on the side of the post, like on this one. You can see it's kind of like an Uzi front sight, sort of, right here. I have a few things I want to note on the installation. I didn't actually record any of the installation process. It's really, really almost identical to a regular G36 sight rail installation. The only discrepancy is that instead of using your usual sight screws and then the tabs on the other side, on this one you actually have a stainless steel threaded insert. You can see 3 of them right there, just like on a normal G36 sight rail. But on the other side you have a 3mm Allen head. You can see right there. So it doesn't use the same screws. This does ship with the Allen key included, so you do have a method of tightening it down if you don't already own a 3mm Allen key, but I would recommend actually getting a proper one and getting it into a torque wrench and properly torquing this down. I went to the normal OEM HK torque setting of 22.5 inch-pounds, And yeah, it's been holding zero really well. This is, like I said, it's a pretty overbuilt sight rail, so I wouldn't expect there to be any issues. Actually, even before I applied any torque or even had the screws in here, it's just a very, very tight fit, very good tolerances on it to this receiver and also on my SL8 receiver. There were no issues whatsoever. There's even a little over insertion pin on the front, just right about here. I'll show you a close-up, which helps so it can't potentially move. Just kind of a mechanical stop, which I think is cool. Like I said, very overbuilt and a very sturdy rail. So that about does it for the hard facts of this review video, but before I ended, I did want to give a little bit of just a few additional opinions on this. So starting out with really the biggest draw, like I said at the start, I think for this sight rail is the gooseneck up here in the front. Personally, I think if you're not going to be mounting a laser to your G36 build, for all, I don't know, 5 people watching this that actually have a G36 where it's applicable, because such a niche platform, unfortunately. But if you're not going to be doing a whole night vision setup, I would really just go with one of the HK G36 sight rails. I don't really see much other advantages. There's really a lot of disadvantages to this sight rail, but I think it's kind of mitigated by this working so well for night vision up here. The other options you have for mounting a laser would be to mount it to the handguard itself, and at least here in the US, it is pretty, I won't say impossible, but generally the handguards for G36s that actually hold zero well enough to accommodate a laser aiming module are rather rare, and usually even if you do find them, they're rather expensive too. Certainly more expensive than this rail, which is not cheap either, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to minimize that, but it's nowhere near as expensive. Everything with the G36, unfortunately, is rather expensive to do. But I like this. While this sight rail is rather weighty, I think I am still saving weight for this setup by not replacing the handguard. I think the best option otherwise, if you do want to mount it to the handguard, would be like one of the new HK H-key handguards. Those have a very robust locking system. But other than that, you know, I don't really trust a lot of the other handguards, because even if you get one with a pick rail up here, keep in mind, since this has a free floated barrel, there's a lot of flex if you mount it there, which I know a lot of people are talking about lately, just with night vision in general. So I do like that this is kept off of the handguard as a whole. It holds zero really, really well. If you're doing a Latvian G36 clone build, which I wasn't starting out doing, but if you want to look up photos of that, it's kind of funny that the one I'm doing is going to end up looking almost exactly like a Latvian G36, which, well, they got a good thing going for them, I suppose, so no complaints about that. But yeah, this is actually the correct rail if you are going for that sort of clone build, which also, speaking of which, I find rather odd that I can't find a single sight adjustment tool for this rail, despite it being used by an entire military. So if any of you out there know of a tool that actually works for this, so I don't need to use pliers, then please do leave that in the comments below, because I would love to not use pliers on this. So I don't know. I did look quite a bit myself on B&T's awful site, admittedly. It's very poorly put together. But I wasn't able to find any tool that would correspond to this. Other than that, if you're interested in the build itself and how this is going, it's pretty much done. I just am going to be chopping the barrel because there's some accuracy concerns I have that with some research I'm thinking possibly might be helped by cutting this down, and then of course I'm going to be threading it and pretty much call it a day there. So this is very close to completion. Other than that, thank you all for watching. Hopefully you found this interesting, and yeah, hopefully if you were looking into this rail, it really does help to provide some information on it, because yeah, if you try to look for any other information, even on B&T's own site, they have pretty much nothing on here. And thank you all for watching. Take care. See you all in the next one. See you then.